I wanted to talk to you about the evolution of the WHS Green Blend. This is a combination of seed varieties that have been planting for over 20 years. And it's really evolved, and it actually evolves every year. But it's one of our staple products. It's one of our top 3 sellers of food plot blends. And it's something that's been important to me for a very, very long time. Like I said, going back over 20 years. It's interesting, last year when we started the seed company, we had 2 seed blends. We had our Brassica blend and we had our Fall Power Green. And the reason we carried those is because they're the staple of what I do. Personally, so I want to make sure that we had both. They're very important to the seed company, and we continue to go through a lot of the both. We're actually selling a lot of our deer fence, which is our screening blend that needs to be planted sometime in early June, mid-June, sometime in June if you look at it that way in most locations. That's a big seller. We sell a lot of switchgrass, but bottom line is this is one of the staples, and I just want to talk about the evolution of it because it's been fun experiencing this along the entire way. And back in the beginning, it wasn't called the WHS Wildlife Blend or WHS Green Blend. That was something with a previous partner that we blended together and started planting in 2011. So this is going back a long ways that we started planting this. I still remember a buck that I shot that had to do with that blend back in the day in 2011. It was big 13 point that I'd shot with a drop tine that we watched all year, and that was but this was just a continuation of what I'd already been planting. And so, but this goes back a lot further than that though. In 2011, going back to the early 2000s, there's a guy by the name of Mike McFadden on the east side of the UP. He's still around. He still is one of the guys that, to me, that was blending a lot of food plot seed varieties together, and he gets a lot of credit for really me going forward and blending a lot of these. Back in the day, you know, we didn't have a lot of seed blends. We didn't even have Brassica with clover back then, so I started adding that myself because I thought it was a good idea in '99, and then that's one of our products we have today too, is that Brassica clover blend where you have the Brassica for the fall, cool season annual, and then you have the basic clover for the following year. Done that a lot, planted that for decades. And so, but when it comes to green blend, Mike planted at least peas and buckwheat, maybe some soybeans back then. I planted that mixture on my property in the UP of Michigan, say like 2001, 2002. And what I found is the beans got gobbled up when they were about 2 inches high. The buckwheat was frost susceptible. It was really tender. The deer loved it, but we'd get a frost early September and you're planting it early August. It didn't last very long. And then the peas were similar to the buckwheat in that they needed a lot of moisture to grow. They're a hardy seed, but with sandy soil, you had lower germination rates, and then the deer would pick them apart just like the beans. So there really wasn't much left going into, and that's where I started layering rye about that time. So I'd have an attractive green blend that was almost too attractive and not really match for the soil varieties. That's why we have a dry soil fall blend that we have. You know, that would have been the perfect blend for dry soil back then, but of course we're planting that now, decades later, in recognition of that. So back then, Mike was instrumental, even teaching me that peas were more like 300 pounds an acre. So you want a pretty high volume per acre, but in most seed companies are more like 5-7 pounds per acre, somewhere around there. And we do have that as a representation in our mix because I like that green leaf. It's like 10% big clover if you look at that in the blend. But we want it as part of the blend still, but we change that amount regularly because, as I'll talk about in a little bit, and part of the evolution of this, you know, back then in 2001, 2002, I was planting with a tractor and a cultipacker and a tiller so I could work the soil up, work the seed into the ground. Cultipacker, I found there's more efficient ways to do that over the years, but it really required some deep tillage to plant. And so that's part of that evolution is I want you to have success even if you have lighter equipment. So that's where that came from. That's where the WHS name came from, WHS Green Blend, that we developed for, at least a name for a previous partner, even though we've been planting it for years, and it's continuing to evolve. And what I mean by that is our Fall Power Greens we had last year, we've changed into a different blend of fall power green this year because I'm always looking at and chasing perfection. So those percentages will always change on the bag. No different than our brassica blend and every other blend. We're always looking at, okay, how can we tweak this? We might even tweak it mid-season, but most of the time we're tweaking it year to year on what we're experiencing because we plant all this stuff and we want to see how well it's doing. But again, these are staple products, that brassica blend, the fall power greens in the fall. I want to make sure that they're hitting for the purpose. The purpose of that fall power green is the fall power greens are really meant to provide a leafy green, lush forage that is virtually foolproof, and it gives the deer some candy crop, and then we're actually layering rye over it later on purpose so we can continue the value and attraction of the plot. The rye is also the fail-safe for any crop in the fall to make sure that you always plan for success and always have something growing. The fall power greens, you can see how it's always changing. This is not what it was last year. We still had buckwheat in there. We had a little oats. We had radish. We had peas. This year we added vetch to it. It's our own variety of vetch, and it's something that is good instant ground cover. It grows with very little tillage, grows fast, and we're expecting you to kill or plow this under the following year when you do your rye. And that way the vetch or any other perennial like that doesn't take control, even the clover. We don't want the clover to take control the following year. Let's say we had medium red clover in this, because if you have light tillage equipment and you wait all the way till the end of the summer, it's the same thing. We want you to terminate that with the rye in the spring, whether you spray it, mow it, get rid of it. But we want, or in some cases, a lot of you till it under, but we don't want that to be present in the field the following year to when we go to plant in the fall. You have to actually no-till drill with an expensive drill or use deep tillage equipment to plant. We want this to be more of a universal planting for everybody. So you can see in here, I'll point this out, brassica, you can't overseed because you'll stunt the brassica plants. In this blend, you can see we add up to about 110 to 16% of total amount of seed per acre, if that makes sense. Not number of seed, but actually volume as it contributes to an acre. We have over an acre because you can overseed with buckwheat a little bit. You can overseed with radish. You can overseed with peas. You can overseed radish a little bit. We only have 30% in there, roughly 31, 32. So you can overseed a little bit more than that, but we don't want to ever go over on where you have too much radish competing for itself. Pea you can overseed. Hairy vetch, we want to stick. So some of those seed varieties you can overseed a little bit, and we want you to find success. So that's why we put a little bit more in the bag per acre than we need to, so that you can ensure that you have success when you buy the product. Number 5, we want the fall power green to be widely adapted to various regions. We want it to do well in the south. We want it to do well in the north. The only difference is in the north, you plant it more towards August 1st. In the south, you might plant it towards September 1st to September 15th, depending on where you're at. You're looking for a high volume, lush green forage. We want little to no tillage. Hairy vetch, buckwheat, oats, radish, they all do very well by throwing them on top of the soil compared to beans. The WHS green blend, back in 2011, we had about 25 to 30 pounds of beans per acre. We had a high amount of peas, and then we had oats. The problem was, if you increased the amount so you had more beans and peas because the deer would pick through them, then you had too many oats. So in ag country, the oats would drown out the planting. And so it would actually spoil the peas and beans that were in the mix. The beans also need to be covered up, and so that's how we started getting back to my buckwheat ultimate no-till that I did 20 years ago, because I wanted that buckwheat to cover up the big seeds and to aid in germination without having to put soil over the top of it, or use a cultipacker and a tiller to drive it down into the freshly tilled soil. We use a cultipacker for good seed to soil contact, for smashing down buckwheat, but bottom line is we wanted little to no tillage, we wanted lush green forage, and we wanted foolproof results. And so those were all goals of that forage, and that's why it's always changing. That's why we've moved away from beans, because while some people have good tillage equipment and they can put beans in, they either get browsed out quickly, especially that time of year when the rest of the beans in the area are dying. Go up north, it gets browsed out quickly, or they don't germinate well because they're not packed under the soil. Not everyone plants with a buckwheat ultimate no-till that I originated back and came up with over 20 years ago. So the beans are not very foolproof. The peas are not very foolproof, but I like them. And the peas are, again, it's a very hardy seed. So the peas will germinate in there. It's just a matter of when they germinate. So I like having peas in there. Imagine, a big clover plant that comes up has about 10% of the planting. That's why it's the lowest percentage, because it's the higher risk. It's decent, it's better than beans, but still hairy vetch, buckwheat, oats, radish, they're all very, very foolproof for coming in just with throwing on open soil that's been chemically or weed-free controlled, and then experiencing a good crop. Should you add rye to it? This right here, this mix right here will grow very thick and provide a lush green crop in a lot of areas. Now, if you don't have a lot of deer, you might find that it gets really good volume. It doesn't have too many oats in it. The oats are really only 20% of volume by acre compared to what you normally plant in oats. So very small percentage. There's no need to double this mix or triple it like the WHS green blend in the past, so you get more beans and peas in it. So you have to be very conscious of that. Adding rye. If you're in an ag area, if you're in a high deer density area, you might find that this gets eaten down to the dirt by mid-September, October 1st. When you see that happening, we encourage you to add 150 pounds of rye about 4 to 5 weeks after planting. That would be early September around here. You're just trying to extend the life of the plot. And what that rye also does, we don't want to plant that early, because oats planted in a very small amount will grow up, and the deer sometimes eat those oat heads in December. They eat that seed head. It only gets about 2 feet high, goes through its maturity phase very fast. We use oats as a cover crop a lot of times for clover, planted in the spring. But bottom line is, the rye, they don't typically eat when they're older, so we want to add that later. We don't want the oats choking out, but we want that rye on there because the rye actually, unlike oats, stays green in through the springtime, and that's what the deer love picking at during the spring, so that they can find something green in the woods. The first thing that pops up, well before clover, well before alfalfa. So it's a great crop to fill the hungry needs of deer before spring green up. In the UP in Michigan where I was at, that was sometimes 4 to 6 weeks before spring green up. Nothing else green in the woods but that rye. So it was very, very important. Once spring green up took place, they didn't hit the rye. They didn't need it anymore. Plus it was getting older and stemmy, be less concentrated, more hitting clover and all the forbs and forages in the woods at that time. So rye serves to lengthen the use of the plot. So it's not just a fall hunting plot. It actually doubles by adding the rye later, which you can't plant at the same time. I hope that makes sense. We're planting ours around August 1st, our power green, and we don't want to mix that rye at that time. We want to wait about 5 weeks later, put the rye down, and then that aids in giving life and attraction out of the plot all the way through the springtime. So rye is important. If you don't see that there's enough open ground for the rye, don't plant the rye. Let the fall greens go right in, and I'm thinking of some areas in the south where a lot of these plants, the peas will eventually get frosted out and die. The oats get frosted out and die. Buckwheat gets killed with the first frost, like it did on the 20-some years ago for me in the UP on a September 1st frost. But a lot of these, if you're planting down the south, you're not getting that early frost. They can live almost the entire season or more and do pretty well for you. And then you're taking care of it in the spring, terminating it, tilling it under. A lot of these are also good forage builders. That's why we call them fall power greens. Tillage radish is an excellent brassica that pulls nutrients from the soil. Oats, good soil builder. Buckwheat, excellent soil builder. Hairy vetch, peas, they're all great soil builders. So you're offering a good green, leafy, lush crop for the deer. You're building the soil the following spring. Even the root systems build the soil significantly. It's all fine organic matter. So even if you just kill it or terminate it by killing it, spraying chemical on it, it's still a lot of value going into the following spring for your soil and for subsequent crops. We use it as a rotation with our brassica blend. So you're putting one on one side, one on the other, and you just flip them every year so you're not putting brassica in one spot. I know that tillage radish is a brassica. It's in the brassica family, but it's diluted in the amount that it contributes overall to the plot. And because we're recommending that you put a summer crop of buckwheat in between, you're really not planting that twice in a row. I hope that makes sense. But there's a lot of thought and care that goes into this. Bottom line is I want it to be widely adapted for region and soil type, be easy to plant for minimal tillage, and that's why it's one of our top 3 sellers for food plot blends this year. when we have 12 blends. And then last year, it was one of our founding blends of Brassica and the Fall Power Greens. It's come a long ways during this time. We enjoy evolving it every single year. We're always seeking perfection. It'll change next year, I can guarantee too, with these percentages. And I don't even know why yet. We'll get into the fall, we'll see how it does, and we'll change those percentages so that you can find an even greater level of success next year and beyond with our old WHS green blend, all the way in that history back to Mike McFadden back in the early 2000s, and now what we call our Fall Power Greens today. Now, I don't know if you've checked out our main website lately, whitetailhabitatsolutions.com, but we've really had a lot going on, including hats, books, our web class, and certainly our new seed company, WHS Wildlife Blends. When you click on seed on our site, it'll take you right to our brand new site for the seed company. We have all 12 blends available. So check it all out though. I encourage you, I appreciate you checking it out. Whether you buy anything or not, really appreciate you visiting the site and seeing what's going on, and continue to watch because we have big things coming later this year.